Well, thanks for being here, everyone. I know many of you already know about the project. Some of you are going to learn a lot of new stuff today. Others um, might yourselves be using this presentation with your folks in your own communities and constituencies. So think ahead to that as well. So the goals for the presentation today are to learn about this project that we are working on to explore the potential creation of a new, what we're calling community-led development district in the Cully neighborhood. And this would be a new way of using an old tool that the city has used in other neighborhoods for many decades called TIF, tax increment financing. So we're going to learn what tax increment financing is, how it's been used in the past, and how our vision in Cully is to use it in a very different way. We're also going to talk about some of the ideas of investments that could be made through a community-led TIF district in Cully. Also talk about ideas for how that district might be governed for as long as it exists, which could be 20 years or so. And we are going to have some trivia questions. So pay attention because there will be a chance to win a prize at the end. So first, what is a TIF district? TIF stands for tax increment financing. And a TIF district is a line that gets drawn on the map around a neighborhood. And this is something that's allowed under state law. And cities can decide to create these districts. Within the line on the map, part of the property taxes that are getting paid by property owners in that neighborhood get set aside each year into a special account. So it's, in some ways, TIF is like a bank account for a neighborhood. And money for that account is coming from a portion of the property taxes that are already being paid. So an important thing to remember is that this is not creating a new tax. It is setting aside part of the tax that's already being paid and keeping it here in the Cully neighborhood to be used in the Cully neighborhood. Now, the term tax increment is because the exact amount of the property taxes that get set aside into this special account is the amount that property taxes go up every year as long as the district exists. So, for example, right now, if you paid $1,000 a year on your property tax, and next year your property tax bill went up by 3%, just that extra 3% would get set aside into the account. The main part that you had paid the year before still goes to fund all the other things that it was already going to pay for. So every year it's that extra amount that gets added above the baseline is what gets set aside into the special account, and that's the tax increment. So this bank account, so to speak, would exist for probably 20 years. Every year, more money from the neighborhood is getting set aside into the account. And so you can see that that amount of money in this account is growing. Every year, more is coming in because that increment above the baseline is bigger every year. And we are anticipating that in the Cully neighborhood, this bank account could collect at least $50 million over 20 years, or likely more than that. Because we can predict how much money and project how much will be coming in every year for the next 20 years, these TIF districts are also allowed to take out loans to pay for bigger projects up front and then pay back those loans over the future years as the taxes keep getting deposited into the account every year. So what can TIF money be spent on? Now, the state has really restricted this. It can only be spent on physical things, real estate and buildings and infrastructure, capital expenses. So the shorthand that the city often uses is sticks and bricks. TIF cannot be spent for running social services or programming, but it could be spent to build the building where the social service would operate, or to renovate an existing building to make it work for a social service to operate. But the thing to remember is it can only be spent for buying land, buying buildings, building stuff, repairing stuff, capital investments. In the city of Portland, it is a city ordinance that 45% minimum of all funds from a TIF district have to be used for affordable housing. In addition to that 45%, we could decide to go well above that. That's just the minimum. Other things that could be done are to provide spaces for small businesses to operate, build commercial spaces, build community facilities, and it would be allowed under the state and city rules to use TIF funds to make improvements to infrastructure such as roads or sidewalks, or in other neighborhoods, it's been used to build transit. Those are all things that are allowed. In Portland, currently, there are 11 full-scale TIF districts, and the city refers to those as urban renewal areas. You may be more familiar with that term, urban renewal areas, or URAs. Those are on the map here. In addition, there are 7 smaller TIF districts that the city calls neighborhood prosperity districts. And in Cully, we actually have 2 of those that already exist along our main commercial corridors on 42nd Avenue and Cully Boulevard. So we have 2 of those small TIF districts in our neighborhood already. But what we are discussing here today is the potential of creating a full-scale, much larger TIF district, larger in terms of geography and in terms of the amount of money that could be generated. The other existing full-scale TIF districts or urban renewal areas you might be familiar with are the Interstate Corridor Urban Renewal Area, which is much of inner north and northeast Portland and includes Mississippi Avenue and Alberta Street, Williams and Vancouver Avenues, and goes all the way out into St. John's. There's also a large urban renewal area in Lentz, down in southeast Portland, at the Gateway area, near the convergence of I-205 and I-84. And then a cluster of other ones around downtown and the central east side industrial area. At this point, are there any questions or comments before we move on to the next section? Maddie, since I can't see everyone's picture, I'm going to ask you to keep an eye out for any questions and help flag them.
I actually have a question. It's Luli here.
Yeah.
Is the what's the state of the reassessment in the Cully neighborhood? Because I know that the county had been looking at doing a new some kind of new assessment project to level out the property values, because they had been so suppressed from the Measure 5 back in the 1990s, which David probably knows way more about than I do. But that the mandated 3% per year increase also stems from that. That's one thing that you're that I know that I appreciate about the TIF district is it's guaranteed a 3% per year increase. But the state of the assessed value is something different. Do we know anything about that yet?
I do not.
Okay.
David or others, do you know anything about this?
I haven't heard anything about a reassessment project at all.
Okay.
Yeah, what what Lily's referring to is that under Oregon state law, property taxes cannot go up by more than 3% per year, even if the market value of the property goes up more than 3%. The amount that is being charged as tax will not go up more than 3%. And so, yeah, really, like you said, that creates some stability and predictability in terms of anticipating how much money will be coming in to one of these TIF accounts, forecasting ahead into the future.
I have a question. This is Annette. And on this map, I see the different sizes of existing TIF districts. I recognize that in Cully neighborhood, developing the boundaries for a TIF district is a work in progress and that there are many inputs on that. But is there a general idea of visually what the size of a Cully TIF district would look like? How much of the neighborhood would it cover?
Thanks, Annette. I'll start my answer to that by pointing out that under state law, there's a limit on how much of the entire city's land area can be included in a TIF district at any given moment. And that is 15% of the city's total area can be part of a TIF district. And so there's that limit on how much of Cully could be included because it has to fit in with all these other TIF districts around the city. What we've been told by Prosper Portland is that they think there's about enough capacity to add 1,000 acres of land in Cully. And I do not know exactly what that means on the map, other than that like the vision we've talked about is that we would kind of connect that empty space between our two existing mini TIF districts. So, we've got the one along 42nd Avenue and we've got the one along Cully Boulevard, and then the whole middle of the neighborhood is not part of the TIF district. The important benefit of including as much area as possible is that the more property that's in the TIF district, the more money is coming into the account. So you can do more projects that benefit the community. The other important piece is that the money can only be spent on properties that are part of the district. So if you exclude parts of the neighborhood from being in the TIF district, you could not spend the TIF money there. So you want to make sure if there are any places that you think, hey, this could be a great place to build new affordable homes, or this could be a great place to have a building where small minority-owned businesses could operate. You want to make sure that piece of land is within the boundaries of the district, because otherwise you cannot spend the TIF money there. So those are all parts of the considerations that are coming into play as we're trying to figure out exactly where the boundaries will be drawn.
And to follow up on that, are there types of buildings and construction that provide bigger bang for the buck, if you will, on the taxes coming in? So does the houses that I pay on my tax, is that the same percentage value as, say, for example, a building that is used for small businesses, such as like the lab building on 42nd Avenue, and then that in comparison to the taxes on, say, like a new affordable housing structure, like the upcoming Las Saladitas building?
I don't know the complete answer to that,
Mhm.
in that, but I do know for the last part of your question that affordable housing properties do not pay property tax. So they are exempt from paying property tax. I don't know if there's a difference between how much a residential property owner pays and a commercial property owner.
Thank you.
Luli, did you have something you were going to add to that?
Yeah, the one caveat about affordable housing providers not paying taxes is that they do house folks at or below 60% of median income. So that's the ceiling, which is certainly a benefit and for the expansion of affordable housing in Northeast Portland.
Got it. So in order to be exempt from property taxes, the housing has to be affordable for folks below 60% of the median income of the area.
Correct.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, we will move on to the next section here, which is about how has tax increment financing been used previously. So we saw on the map where some of the existing urban renewal areas are. These are districts where the city has decided that they need to be renewed. And historically, that has meant that those are neighborhoods where poor people and people of color live. And that is why they need to be renewed, quote unquote. And we have seen that happen over and over again, that these TIF districts are created in order to bring public investment that would then attract private investment into a neighborhood as a means of building new things, of raising property values, of increasing the tax base. And the very predictable result has been that existing residents have been forced out of their longtime neighborhoods as rents have gone up and as property values have gone up and as the cost of buying a house has gone up. These TIF districts have often resulted in mass displacement of people of color, especially the Black community. In the urban renewal district in inner Northeast Portland, the interstate corridor area, just between 2000 and 2010, at least 8,400 African Americans were displaced, in part because of the increased rents and property values that came along with the TIF district and the investments that are being made. Many of those investments serve to subsidize private development, and basically amounted to a subsidy for gentrification. And this is the history that we are very aware of as we are exploring whether or not this tool of tax increment financing can be used in a totally new way. Rather than use it to pay for gentrification, we want to use it to fight back against gentrification. And that is a new approach, and one that we are we're exploring if that is possible before we commit to endorsing the creation of a district in Cully. The good news is that there are some examples of how TIF money could be used differently. And as we've talked about, we have 2 of these smaller scale TIF districts already in the Cully neighborhood that are showing us the way to do that. So on 42nd Avenue, for example, the Our 42nd Avenue organization was formed to administer that small scale TIF district. And that district makes investments into commercial properties to support small scale business owners, specifically minority owned businesses. And the decision making about what the money is spent on is done by a board of business owners and residents in the area. So it's very different than how decisions are made for the other TIF districts in the city, where it is city government making the plans and making the decisions for what is going to be paid for. So one of the ways that our 42nd Avenue has been able to support small businesses and minority-owned businesses with their funding is to take out master leases on larger properties, and that referenced one of these on 42nd Avenue, and then renovate the building, divide it up into smaller storefronts, and then rent those out at below market rents to small businesses that would not otherwise be able to afford market rate commercial rents. That's just one example of the kind of project that has already been done with a much smaller pot of TIF funds. The other kinds of projects that are already being done around Cully with other kinds of public money include affordable housing development, home repairs for low-income homeowners, affordable home ownership opportunities, and those are the kinds of things that could really be expanded at taken to a much bigger scale if a TIF district were to be expanded across the entire neighborhood. Okay, are there any other questions at this point? And I need to step away for about 20 seconds to see to something with the baby that's going on in the background. Sorry.
I can do the next section. Oh, I can't because Cameron is doing the slides. Yeah, now's a great time for questions if anyone has any lingering ones.
Annette here. Oh, Cameron, are you back?
I am, yeah, sorry, the joys of working from home. Go for it, Annette.
Well, I'm looking at the slide deck right now, and you talked about the lab building on 42nd, and I'm having a little lapse on what is the TIF corner on Alberta and 42nd? What is that representing?
I think that is representing the Commotion dance studio space that our 42nd Avenue is leasing out and then making available for community programming.
Actually, that the one on 42nd and Alberta, that one is the lab, and then on 42nd and Sumner, that's the Go 42 space that houses Nightingale Acupuncture, Essential Quality Care, Revelations Hair Design, and Face Lash Studio.
Thank you. Great clarification. I was just looking at the block differently. Alberta, not Prescott.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. For some reason, I had Prescott in my mind too. Thank you.
No problem. Glad I could chime in.
So I think the bottom line in this section is, in the past, TIF districts have been used to make investments that contribute to gentrification. What we're talking about here is capturing the increased property values that are already happening in our neighborhood, using that money to pay for things that help people have stability in the face of gentrification. So we don't want to pay for gentrification. We want to pay for the things that help people thrive even as gentrification is happening. Which leads us to this next section here. How can a TIF district be done differently in a way that would meet our goals? And so we think there are two criteria, and this is what we are judging the proposal that we're developing for a new TIF district. This is what we're judging it against. First, who is going to be making decisions about the TIF district? And there are two levels of decision making. First is that a TIF district plan has to be created and adopted by City Council. And that plan lays out the goals, the priorities of what will be paid for, how decisions will be made over the 20 years that the district will exist, what kinds of projects will and will not be funded, but at a somewhat higher level. So that plan is what is being worked on right now by the coalition of organizations in Cully that are working on this project together. And we believe that the voices and opinions and priorities that have to be centered and prioritized in this plan are the voices of individuals and groups that are themselves vulnerable to displacement and most affected by gentrification. It's not the voices of the bureaucrats downtown. It's not the voices of myself or the folks of the Neighborhood Association Board. It is Black residents, mobile home park residents, Indigenous and tribal folks, low-income people, people of color, immigrants and refugees and renters, the people who we know are structurally, systematically vulnerable to being displaced and being excluded from our neighborhood if property values and rents continue to rise unchecked. It's their priorities that need to be front and center in the content of the plan. And then beyond the content of the plan, those same voices need to be front and center in decision-making and leadership that happens over the 20 years that this district will exist. Because the district plan is not going to be able to anticipate what every dollar will be spent on over the next 20 years. There needs to be a decision-making system that is established in the plan that lays out 15 years from now, how will it be decided exactly what projects get funded in that year and in the next 5 years from that point on, because we can't always anticipate now, 20 years into the future, what the exact opportunities will be. So that's the first criteria, is whose voices are prioritized in creating the plan and then making decisions about implementing that plan. So a question I'm going to ask for you all to share your responses to is, why is it these groups that are most affected by gentrification and displacement? Why are Indigenous and tribal people, Black people, African-American folks, people of color, low-income people, renters and mobile home residents, why are they most affected by gentrification and displacement?
Through historic policies and experiences where improvements were made without their inclusion, and essentially folks were priced out and pushed out of their neighborhood for affordability reasons, and also historically in Portland, we had the redlining of districts where folks could only buy in certain areas. And then later those areas became folk places that other people wanted to move into, and that caused displacements.
Yes, agreed, Annette. Historic devaluing and underinvestment of neighborhoods where people of color and low-income people lived, and then kind of the exploitation of those low values by the public sector and outside investors that then force people out of the communities that they had built by their own blood, sweat, and tears.
And because of these historic inequities, these are people who are least likely to have acquired any wealth. They are often among the 40% of the American people who don't have $400 in savings, who can't absorb a sudden medical or physical emergency that requires $400. So they don't have that resilience.
I would like to name that as intergenerational wealth. Wealth has not been able to been passed from generation to generation. Thereby, there's a privilege for some folks who can have a larger pool of finances in their bank account. And the overall system tends to support the group of people who have prospered from intergenerational wealth. Whereas folks in many of the previously displaced areas have not had that privilege of, again, intergenerational wealth.
Absolutely. Anyone else?
I want to just chime in, Myra, here. From what I've heard from before is like the rises as the area becomes nicer, investors come in and spend more money on fixing up more homes. But those are homes that people who live here cannot afford. So you see the area that you are living in become nicer, but you cannot afford to get in one of those nicer homes as much as you want to. I've seen like beautiful homes being built in the community, and it's like, that's nice, but not anybody here in the park, including myself as a mobile home park resident, can afford that. So as much as the area becomes nice, it's not affordable for the people who are already here. You know, if it was the opposite case, that would be wonderful for the opportunity for people who are already here to stay here and to move into something that they desire and enjoy, like the growth of the community.
It's a really important point, Myra. And I think reminds me that displacement really happens in waves too. You might see really dramatically witness displacement if an entire mobile home park gets shut down and all of those residents are kicked out of their homes. You might see it happen really dramatically if an entire apartment building gets bought and the rent gets doubled and everyone who lived there all at once is kicked out of the neighborhood. But there's also that longer term sort of exclusion based displacement where even folks who might own their own home and themselves be able to stay in the neighborhood because they own their own home and they're not subject to a rent increase, at whatever point they leave that home because it's time for them to sell or they pass away, or whatever point that home changes hands, it is no longer affordable to someone in their same position. Cully has a lot of Black homeowners. And what will happen as those homes are sold? Will other Black families be able to afford to buy them? There are a lot of low income homeowners in Cully who have owned their homes for decades. Whenever those homes go on the market again, other low-income folks will not be able to afford them. So there's that more subtle, kind of less dramatic, but equally damaging, slower process of displacement and really exclusion, and preventing people from having opportunities for different types of housing in the neighborhood that happens over time. And so it's a real priority for this project, is not only to prevent displacement right now of people who live here right now, but also to prevent losing those opportunities for low-income people and people of color to have housing here in the future. So that leads us to the second criteria that we're judging this whole project against. Not only do we need the decision making to be led by folks who are vulnerable to displacement, we need the actual investments to explicitly and exclusively benefit folks who are vulnerable to displacement. And that could happen through the kinds of projects that we've been mentioning already. And so I'm just going to recap what we've talked about so far. Things like affordable rental homes, affordable home ownership opportunities, preserving existing housing that could be a danger of being bought by investors in order to keep it affordable. And then the different kinds of investments that can support small businesses, including businesses that are here already, and to provide opportunities for Cully residents who might want to start a business but can't afford market rate rent, or can't afford to fix up a building to operate a new kind of business in it. There are lots of other ideas that we've heard shared about investments that people would like to see to make life better in Cully. Paving streets and building sidewalks and community centers and swimming pools. Lots of great ideas for things that would make life better. We need to weigh all of those ideas against the potential impact they could have on actually contributing to gentrification and displacement, and think about how can we prioritize funding projects that provide the stability for folks to stay in the neighborhood and have an affordable place to live, and have a place to run a business and to have a good job, against the kinds of investments that might make life easier, might make it more enjoyable, but could also inadvertently lead to people actually being excluded from the neighborhood if they contribute to increased rents and property values. And so we can be strategic about how we balance those different kinds of investments and how we sequence them over time. There are all kinds of investments already coming to the neighborhood, even without this TIF district. We have a new park that opened 2 years ago. We have De La Salle High School that is under construction right now. The Portland Community College Metro Workforce Center is being redeveloped starting, I think, later this year or next year. So all these investments are already coming to the neighborhood, even if we don't have a TIF district. The question the TIF district is really trying to answer is, who will be able to live in Cully to enjoy these investments? Just like Myra talked about, there are new homes being built, but who are they for? And can we really say that we've improved the neighborhood if the people who make up the neighborhood are gone, and it's a whole new neighborhood of people with more privilege and wealth that are here in the future? That is what we are trying to prevent. So right now we are in the midst of a series of focus groups, I think 16 different focus groups, specifically with members of our community who are themselves vulnerable to displacement, in order to inform the content of a proposed TIF district plan for the community-led TIF district in Cully. And we are doing this with the support of the city of Portland. The agency Prosper Portland governs TIF districts in the city, and they are providing a lot of staff time and technical expertise and actual money to pay for us to do this work right now. So they have skin in the game, and they are on the hook to work with us on this proposed new way of doing a TIF district. And from there, we need to take it to the city council. If we can create a plan that we feel confident is going to achieve our goals of preventing displacement and actually creating more opportunity for folks who could be at risk of displacement. If we feel like the plan is going to do that, then we will move it forward to city council later in the year. And when I say we, I'm talking about this coalition of community-based organizations that are active here in the Cully neighborhood. We've also recognized that among these organizations, there are parts of the Cully neighborhood and folks who are vulnerable to displacement who are not already well represented among these organizations. Are not already part of their constituencies. For example, and a huge priority is for us to engage with the Black community in Cully. And so in addition to these existing organizations reaching out to their constituencies and folks who are already involved through their community-based programs, we have a community engagement committee that includes a number of community members who are doing additional outreach, really focused on involving residents who are not already plugged in with one of these organizations. And so in 2 weeks, we're going to be having a focus group specifically with the Black community. We're working on a focus group specifically with Vietnamese speakers, and we're working on focus groups in English and Spanish with mobile home residents. So we've really analyzed where our gaps are in our existing networks and have made explicit efforts to connect with those residents. Of course, in a very challenging climate for doing community engagement right now, where we can't go talk to people and invite them to a face-to-face in-person meeting. So we would really be happy for other opportunities to share this information with your organizations, with your faith communities, with folks at Sabin CDC, with other audiences in the neighborhood. So that's one way that you can continue to help us spread the word. Another is that we are launching a survey this week, which we'll send out on the email list, that we would ask you to help share in your networks. Just like with the focus groups, we will be prioritizing responses to the survey from Black folks, Indigenous and tribal folks, people of color, renters, mobile home residents, and low-income people. Everyone's welcome to respond to the survey, but we're being very explicit that those are the voices that will be prioritized as we are translating the survey responses into the content of the district plan for our new proposed TIF district. Okay, any other questions at this point? Okay, well, in that case, I'm gonna ask Maddie to take it from here and ask you some questions.
Cool. So it sounds like Cameron has a raffle prize for y'all.
Oh, geez. Okay.
I mean, you said that, right?
Yeah, I did say that. It was in my script.
I don't know what it is. It's a surprise. But I'm going to ask you some questions. Everyone who answers gets their name written down. You can answer multiple times and have your name written down multiple times. And then after we're done, I will use a random number generator to pick a winner. So first question is, where does the money for a TIF district come from?
Folks should just unmute themselves and
I
shout it
feel
out,
like-
right, Maddie?
Yeah,
This
shout
is
it out.
Maria. I feel like I'm cheating because I just saw this last night, but maybe I have to see it twice. Anyway, the TIF district money comes from the tax increase year over year, and that gets put in a special account.
Yeah. What is anyone can answer. Oh, Myra, go ahead.
Those were my exact words.
Cool. The next question is, what does the increment refer to?
Well, I think the increment is the difference between the tax last year and the tax this year. So it's that step up amount.
Yep.
But it doesn't mean that the tax will go up because of the TIF.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah, it's an important point. It's going to go up anyway.
Mm-hmm.
We're just grabbing that increase and setting it aside to use for really good things here in the neighborhood.
Cool. Next question. What investments are allowed with TIF money in Portland? In other words, what kind of investments?
Bricks and sticks, public infrastructure, transit, street improvements and sidewalks.
Awesome. Can you remind me of your name?
It's Loulie, Loulie.
Awesome. Next slide. What have been some negative effects of TIF districts in Portland?
Displacement and gentrification.
All right, next slide. I think you went backwards. Would have been the most affected communities by those negative impacts of TIF, and why? Yeah, Myra put in the chat displacement for the last question.
Black and people of color, low income people.
Renters.
Yep. Anyone else? Okay, next slide. Okay, this one's a hard one. Really gotta recall back of a few minutes ago. What are the two conditions that would make it possible for a TIF district to prevent displacement and gentrification?
The decisions are made by those who are most vulnerable to displacement, and the investments preferentially benefit those people.
Bingo. Those are the two conditions. Yeah, Myra, community led for sure. All right, next. What would motivate people you know in the neighborhood to participate in a community-led TIF district? How can we as a group help make this happen?
I guess some things that come to mind for me is just like kind of getting the word out that it is a truly community-led initiative, and that we actually want to have genuine participation by community members, but then also potentially, if possible, being able to maybe pay them for their time. Any time that you're spending on something else that you normally wouldn't, particularly for the communities that we're trying to include. I think paying them for their time is usually a pretty, not just good incentive, but equitable way to grow participation from those groups.
For sure. Any other ideas?
This is maybe more of like a rather than like a near term, more of like a longer term comment, but I think folks will be folks who might not be reaching right now, or we might be working to reach, but haven't engaged as much currently, might be motivated to increase their participation after seeing some of like the early results, should Cully TIF get approved. So like whatever that first project or those first two projects that take place, and those results start to impact the community, that if those projects are like really community driven and really have a lot of community benefit, that could feed energy into the community and motivate more folks to get involved also.
Totally. How about one more idea? Anyone?
My snarky idea is to link it to, um, something celebrating the end of COVID.
That's a great idea. If it ever ends. Yeah, totally. Make sure that it relates to our current situation and the situation we all find ourselves in. Yeah, well, thanks everyone. I'll need a few minutes to, well, just like 1 minute to figure out the raffle winner. So I'll turn it back over to Cameron for now.
Thank you, Maddie. So this is when we do our focus groups, we're then splitting community members up into small groups to discuss this question. If you had $50 million to invest in the stability and well-being of Indigenous and Black and people of color and low-income people and renters and mobile home residents in Cully, what would you build? And we share these sorts of ideas. And then we ask folks to really brainstorm and tell us their priorities. The survey that we'll be sharing the link for on the email list also offers folks the chance to give their feedback on this question. We are about out of time, so I'm not going to go through the rest of the presentation. But we will, I think Maddie probably in a couple moments can have the raffle winner ready. But
Well, I
in the
have the
meantime,
raffle winner ready.
oh, ready already? Okay, so in the meantime, I'm going to offer the same raffle prize that we heard last night at the CAN meeting, which is a gift card to Bison Coffee House, one of our neighborhood businesses. So that's coming to the winner. And also last night at CAN, a lucky community member won a personalized on foot or bike tour of the neighborhood from Annette Pronk. Annette, I'm wondering if there might be an opportunity to add an additional person to that tour.
Oh, I think that'd be great. The more the merrier.
Okay, well, I think maybe the idea was that your tour would even stop by Bison Coffee to get a treat to go. So whoever wins the raffle here that Matt is about to announce could be invited to join the neighborhood tour and get a treat at Bison Coffee. Can't hear you, Maddie. You're sharing something really exciting, but we can't hear it.
Sorry. The winner is Maria.
Yes.
All right. Brian, do we have anything else on the agenda, or was that it?
No, that was pretty much it. Just finishing up the presentation. It's the last thing we had.